Cool. So I guess, yeah, welcome everyone to the launch night of SSoA Feminist Week. We're joined with the team from the Feminist Library, and we're really pleased to have you guys with us tonight and hear from you. So I guess, as like an architecture society, learning about what you guys do and your ethos and aspirations was probably a pretty big driving force in terms of why we wanted to do a SSoA Feminist Week. For myself, Tom and Ali, the work that the School of Architecture does in terms of, inclusivity and, really driving towards like these feminist principles. I think it's, as a society, it's really important for us to kind of highlight and celebrate within architectural education, and also for young architects to then bring on through to, their careers in the future. So it's nice to be able to engage in something really important as students, and I think when we started this, we were thinking, okay, why do we want to do this? Why is it important to have a week dedicated to, I guess, feminism and feminist architectural principles? And I think it all comes down back to, as I said, like inclusivity and, creating an aspirational like architecture and moving away from like quite a monotonous kind of two-dimensional architectural language where, we can really celebrate such a wide range of people's voices, not just women, but everyone within Sheffield School of Architecture, kind of broadening the voice of the people that are having these conversations, just to create a more interesting conversation within architecture as well, making people like feel like they have a place within the built environment, and they're all within Sheffield School of Architecture, I guess. So yeah, that's kind of was the driving force behind Feminist Week. So in terms of what's going to be happening for the rest of the week, we've got a really great week planned ahead, including we've got lunchtime talks with students discussing dissertations with the feminist agenda. We've also got with the students talking about the women in property nominees and the also external guests, including Mika Shelk, who will be talking about it's excuse me if I don't pronounce this correctly, Bo-I-Gemenskat, which is really interesting, like housing scheme involving, driven by women in Sweden, and kind of reevaluating the Swedish housing model, I guess. We've also got Harrison String, fellow architects, talking a female-led architecture practice based in the north. They'll be talking on Thursday. And a SSoA film night on the Saturday, hosted by the EDI Student Action Group. We're going to be watching one of the films in the Small Axe series. If you haven't watched them so far, I'd really recommend you watch the Small Axe series. It's fantastic in terms of, bringing a cinematic masterpiece of, expressing and celebrating Black culture. And I think the film we'll be watching, Lovers Rock, has some really interesting, narratives about sexual assault and like the role of women within the Black community as well. And then also finishing off the week, myself and Will, with Matriarch, our podcast release. So yeah, we're really looking forward to the week. Hopefully this Miro board will be an ongoing thing where, feel free to share any questions, ideas with us throughout the week. Keep up to date on our social media as well, where you can ask any questions and stuff in our social media chat boxes and stuff. So Yeah, I think that's it for me, and I guess I'll hand over to Tom to add.
Yeah, so I guess I mean you covered it anyway, but I think it's just important to add just it's sort of a really important ongoing conversation that just needs to be had. And it sort of takes little initiatives like this, which to just sort of spark conversation and like ignite something that sort of creates more of an ongoing change in hopefully the industry. I mean, we're small fish, but lots of things like this add up. So hopefully, hopefully it does make a difference. Now, when we hand over, the Feminist Library people are going to be introducing themselves anyway, but I'll just give a very brief introduction. I'll keep it really short because I don't want to take any wind out of their sails and let them, you know, talk about themselves. But just as a brief overview, they're basically running an ever-developing archive, an ever-growing archive of feminist work that's come out of SSoA in the past 20 years or so. And as I said, it's ongoing, so it's something that's not like a solidified thing. It's going to keep changing as the work evolves and as more people produce more stuff. And it's aimed to be a key resource for students and staff, but also not just for people from SSoA. So it's something that's hopefully going to just keep growing and be a really good reference point for people all over, really. I think that's all I've got to say. Ali, anything to add?
Yeah, I think you both covered it. And without any further ado, I think we'll hand over to the Feminist Library team. So, welcome.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi. Shall I introduce the whole team, even though we're not all here? The Feminist Library team at the moment is myself, Emma Cheetle, and Lewis Hernan, and Kith Skelcher, as well as Doina Petrescu and Carolyn Butterworth, who can't be here. We're all the staff members. And we've been working with an alumni, Noelia Botana, who's been working throughout as an intern, a paid intern on the project. So she's very much at the centre of the library. In fact, does most of the work, I have to say. So that's us as a team at the moment, and we've been joined recently by matriarch Rosa and Alice, who I think you all know, on the steering committee. And as we go forward, we'll be welcoming other student members and other staff members. As Tom said, we're an ongoing kind of developing, being, molding to the circumstances we find ourselves in. We're not a sort of fixed entity of any kind, and nor is the library. The library is also an expanding and changing, an ongoing piece of archival work, really, and that it both is ongoing backwards as well as forwards. I think that's important to say, that it's not a complete picture of the past yet either, because of our resources and because of our institutional memories, and it's a sort of collective ongoing endeavor in that, from that point of view as well. So we hope to expand its the work that's from the past, as well as to expand into the future. And I'm just going to give a really brief background to the project and how we got here with Kith. Kith's going to help me with that. So about a year ago, actually, almost to the day, a year and 2 weeks ago, Kith and myself set up a feminist teach out, which I think some of you may have been at or known about. And
with a bunch of other collaborators, a few of which are here.
Of course, yeah, with collaborators, important collaborators. And we invited a number of previous teachers from Sheffield School of Architecture to this teach out, as well as current members of staff and students. And the idea was to think collectively about what a feminist school of architecture might be, especially located at Sheffield School of Architecture. And it was a very interesting event, and we had some of our previous lecturers who gave talks on their work, as well as Doina gave a talk, Matriarch gave a talk, myself and Catalina Mejia Moreno gave a talk, and also some PGR students, Victoria Okoyo, Ezra Khan, and Emre Akbil gave a talk as well. So there's quite a lot going on, and that was a sort of quite a joyful event. It was aimed at sort of bringing together and bringing people together and thinking about this question that I think Anna proposed, which is kind of, what does it mean to be a feminist school? How do we think of ourselves as a place of collectivity and care, and how do we sort of try and reform or grab hold of some of those ideas that have been floating around the school for a number of years and kind of come and go in waves, if you like, depending on who's around. At that event, Doina gave a very good overview of the school. She's been teaching in the school for nearly 20 years, so she could give a kind of historical overview of how the school had developed over the years and who'd been involved. And I think it was Dan Jarry that said to her, or in conversation, we began to think we mustn't lose this memory, this collective memory of what has been in the school. We need to sort of take stock of the different waves of feminism that have moved through the school, sometimes named as feminist and sometimes not explicitly named as feminist. So Doina and Carolyn put together a little proposal to the faculty for internship funding, which they were successful in their bid, and that enabled us to employ Noelia to start to gather all of the materials from over the years. And Noelia was given sort of endless lists of different people she might contact: students, members of staff, alumni, people going back 20 odd years. And Noelia also set up interviews with a number of those people. So the library in its present form sort of is kind of a result of that. It depended on whether people answered their emails or had the time to give us their materials for the library, and obviously there was a limited amount of funding as well for Noelia to follow some of these things through. Now we've got a bit more funding to start the second stage of the project, which and Noelia will continue to work on gathering materials, and we're thinking of how we can also expand into different areas by hosting blogs and other initiatives, which we'll come on to a bit later, I think. Do you have anything to add to that, Kit?
No, I think that was pretty comprehensive. Yeah. Should we invite Lewis and Noelia maybe to talk a little bit about the digital structure of the library and how we went about setting that up?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I can share my screen maybe with the platform to go a bit through the structure of it very briefly. I'm not sure if you can see there.
Yeah, we can see it now, Noelia.
Well, the library is very simple structure, although it's very interactive, and maybe I will be repeating a bit what we talked in the launch event. But basically, it's divided like into main parts that are like the archive and cultures. And the part of the archive is where you can find all the outputs of students and staff. and it's also like categorized in different, depending on the type of work. For example, for students, you have marked dissertations, marked design projects, special study dissertations, and others. And then for the staff works, you have articles, books, different like categories inside. And then the part of cultures is more alive. You have like the initiatives that are happening at SSoA, the events, the interviews that we did with alumni and member of the staff of the past and the present regarding feminist pedagogy at SSoA. And then we have like this blog section that is something that we are kind of setting up more now. And you will find here that we have a limited amount of things. Like we have like matriarch post, like opening this section. And it will be nice to like do an open call to receive like different like information to include in this part of the blog. And more or less is that. And we have like a contact form that is open to suggestions about works to be included in the library. Yeah, more or less is that kind of the structure. I'm not sure, Luis, if you want to add something.
Yeah, and I suppose just to give some context to the website, the way it works, and part of the questions that we have later on. The library is basically set up on WordPress, and the idea was to have a platform that was flexible enough and that it was easy enough as well for us to put together at that point. And one thing we'll also be talking about is the fact that this project has been basically put together with very little resources. So at the time, it felt like a good platform to do that, but also to enable people who might not have the technical expertise to perhaps work or to operate on another platform, to do it in a way that is relatively easy, which is in theory the idea of WordPress. I suppose that's a good sort of context in terms of the digital side of the library, without going into the different topics we're going to be discussing later on.
Thanks very much, Lewis and Noelia. And then the only other things I wanted to say before we go on to, we've got some questions that we've received that we thought we'd sort of structure a conversation through. But just to say that because it's a digital archive, it's kind of its place or its location in the school is quite important to us. And when we launched it in December, I think, what we found after that launch was that quite a lot of people were asking us where they could even find the library. And so I've now managed to get the link placed on the main page of the Sheffield School of Architecture website, which is a good thing. So that's one thing, but we're also sort of thinking about how we can somehow make it more visible, make it more kind of accessible and visible within the school. So that's maybe a question people can help us with. And also, we'll come on a bit later. We've talked a little bit about how we've been looking forward to expanding the library and expanding the kinds of things it does. But that's also something I think that is something that happens in a live way with the students and staff that are engaged in the school. But I think we thought we would sort of try and structure a little bit of a conversation around some of the themes that we've already had questions regarding. We get questions through the website itself that we haven't yet tried to answer, and we've had various kind of conversations amongst ourselves and others. And at the launch, we also had some questions that were put to us that we couldn't really answer. And the first question is around technology, and I think this question is really for Lewis and Noelia to start with, but then we'd welcome input from everyone else as well. Is this the right platform, as in, is WordPress the right platform? How can our use of technology be considered feminist? Is this form of technology feminist in itself, or what is its relationship to feminism maybe. Technology is often a gendered practice that is associated with, or associated through the construction of masculinity. We've tried to create a platform that reflects our collective nature, but to what extent have we achieved this? Is there anything we could do or should do differently? So, tricky question.
So I was wondering if we paste the questions in to the Miro board. You kind of read them out, but just to allow people to, oh, there you go.
Excellent idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll try and curate that slightly. Oops.
I think it's a complex question, and I suppose if we go back to the discussion that we had when we first put this together, I think the options were whether we went for WordPress, whether we tried to do something a little bit more custom built, something, for instance, built on HTML. And I think we also had at some point the question of whether we should put it together in a wiki. And I think there was a bit of discussion of whether a wiki would be perhaps more in line with the idea that we had of what a feminist library, what a feminist archive would look like. And I think the decision that we took of going for WordPress had more to do with how easy it was for everyone to basically chip in and for everyone just to write something and to be relatively easy to simply publish. But I think that now it's a core of the libraries there. Maybe that is something that we can look into, the fact that whether we could have a part of the library sort of hosted as a wiki so that people could chip in, and they might be these two sides of the library, and one that is more sort of community-led, or rather sort of bottom up, and perhaps there is another area which is the area that is a little bit more curated, and the one that we already see and the one that we know. I don't know what you think, Noelia. Sort of talking too much.
No, it's okay. I was thinking like more in the part of the question that is related if we manage to reflect kind of the collective nature of this and the collective nature of SSoA and its feminist approach in the library and in WordPress. And I was kind of reflecting on that, and I think that maybe depending on the part, maybe we achieved, like the library achieved that in some sections and not much in others. Maybe if we think about, for example, the interviews, if you start listening to the interviews, you can recreate and visualize the collective nature of SSoA in some way when the interviewees talk about each other, and when they talk about the same experiences but from different perspectives, you can see like different perspectives there. And I think you can, catch the sense of collective there. But maybe, in the archive, it's kind of difficult to achieve that. It's more maybe static, more final product than to represent processes. So I think maybe WordPress could be a bit limited in that sense in some way, as you mentioned, Luis.
Although it is easier to use, isn't it? It is a more accessible platform. I think, the fact that we are literally, there's a group of us with all varying levels of knowledge and abilities, kind of literally chipping in and passing stuff around and doing stuff when we can. I think having something that's really accessible is really important to that. And I think particularly with our aim of, bringing more voices on, onto the steering group to kind of keep it. I mean, we'll come on to this later, but I think, how we keep it representative and how we, that's a key challenge, I think. And part of that's being really open and allowing people to come in quite easily and add to the team over time. But that's not an argument, I guess, for WordPress per se, but just for a method that is quite, user-friendly.
It is, and I suppose it's the balance of the advantages, disadvantages, and I guess one thing that I keep wondering is whether the digital library should have a physical counterpart, whether some of these should be stored in any other way. And I'm very aware as well that these sort of format, these digital archives, do give the impression that they tend to be more open or more accessible. But of course, there are always parts of the population which won't be able to access anything that is digital. And whether there is something, a sort of physical part or a physical version of the library that needs to be hosted in the Arts Tower at some point, for instance, that it's perhaps as well something that we need to look into, and perhaps something that can give that redundancy to the information as well. And the other thing that I wanted to put more to the floor and to everyone is this idea of technology and how we use technology and how much that has to do with identities. And it's really something of a reflection on my own experience in teaching technology, in teaching digital skills. And I've noticed this across the years that digital technology, especially in architecture, tends to be interpreted as basically mainly boys playing with toys. And it does feel like that every time that you sort of go into a very specialized module, or that you run a studio that is based on digital technology. And of course, that was something that sort of kept in the background of my mind when we were doing this, of whether the fact that it's a digital archive in a way puts off people or has that connotation as well. And it perhaps is something that I would like to hear from everyone. I would like to hear from the people who have seen the library, who've used the library so far.
I've just put in the next question so people can see kind of what's coming, but I think we are starting to get a few comments on the board. I don't know if anyone wants to kind of read any of those out. Alice or Rosa, do you wanna maybe?
I was just gonna.
Or Alistair, yeah, whoever.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to mention something really important from and something that you'd be proud of as well as a collective. In my studio group this year, we've got a drawing and writing brief, and I think so. If you look at Ayushi's comment, a physical space for the SSoA Feminist Library, what might this look like? We're beginning now to see your work included into people's design processes. So I wonder, I think, Ayushi's here as well, so I think she can perhaps talk about that a bit more coherently. But yeah, that sort of impetus and how...
Hi, sorry, I'll have to take my headphones off, otherwise you won't be able to hear me. Thank you for chipping me in there, Ali. I was actually going to ask this question as well. I think for my third year final project, I'm actually, as Ali said, we're doing a drawing and writing library, and I'm thinking of designing a physical for the library, because I spent quite a time like looking at the work there, and I just generally think it could do with a physical space. I guess I have to think about accessibility and things, but I guess my question is like, what would you guys kind of envisage as a physical space? Like what kind of materials or what kind of feelings would you associate with it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really interesting and really nice to hear as well. That this, I mean, I'm not going to answer your question, but but I think there's a really nice sort of sense that what we talked about, how we talked quite a lot about how the library could also be live or living, and what this kind of living or live library might be, and we didn't really have answers to that. But I think this idea that it actually feeds its way back into student work, and then that student work gets fed back into the library is a really nice sort of crossover that's that obviously we'd kind of really value going forward. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting question. What would this library look like? What would it smell like? Where would it be located? Is, yeah, really fascinating.
And how it would exist in relation to the tower, which, let's be honest, is the most unfeminist sort of structure and symbol that you could conceive, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting design challenge, I think.
I think often we're quite uncritical about, as architecture schools, we're quite uncritical about the buildings that we inhabit as well. And so that's really interesting. I mean, it's a really interesting project. But even things like, I mean, this is like just something we did on like the most basic level ever. But when we're doing matriarch events, just the way you set out a room and like enable conversations to happen, and what food hall offered. When we did the UCU Feminist Teach Out, it might be worth having a look at that. And the fact that actually the buildings we inhabit and the rooms we inhabit create different conversations and different hierarchies and power structures within a space. So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think
that's so true, and how that translates to the digital as well. Sorry, I'm talking over Aish.
No, that's fine.
Yeah. I mean, I was talking with some students today. I'll just say it really quickly, and then you go. About how the digital reviews, now we're getting the hang of them. People are feeling that they're more inclusive, because you don't have that inevitable somebody standing at the front and then everyone else becomes audience. But once people have got used to the space, everybody's equal and everybody has the same voice and the same space on the screen. Do you know what I mean? So there's kind of there's an opportunity for it to be a leveler. So I think it does make you more aware of actually how programmed physical spaces are in terms of shaping those activities. Sorry, Aishi.
So can I just chip in there? Sorry. Yes, so just picking up on what Kiv's saying is that the sort of masculinity we attach to architecture or some forms of architecture or technology, maybe it's an alpha masculinity or a toxic masculinity. So it's not necessarily masculinity per se, or masculinity is something that's not good or to be afraid of, or isn't actually part of feminism. So it's this overt alpha masculinity, I think, that is the issue. And I think over the last year we've seen how all the rest of us can appropriate technology, take ownership of it, and use it. So yeah, technology is just a tool. So I think we just get on and use it, don't we?
So if we could return to Ayushi and then maybe Alice, and then we'll move on to question 2. I'm going to do a bit of steering chairing here. So from my...
No, I was just going to say, yeah, that's really good stuff. I think one piece of advice that someone said kind of in my review as well was that if you're designing a feminist building, don't be apologetic about the way it sits on site, which I thought was just really lovely. And yeah, it's just interesting how we associate certain things with feminist practice, like materials, and yeah, I think, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, this is something that we'll talk about like slightly in the podcast at the end of the week, but to not sound like a broken record all the time, but the way that the studio does seek to like level the playing field in some ways, and that everyone has the same space and the same desk, but then the digital, it's got benefits and it's got negatives, and you know, it's going to be quite interesting when we go back and to see how we fall back into the arts tower, and how we maybe lose certain inclusivity and that we've got in the digital world. Yeah. Just things like just things like attendance being up as well, and like people being able to like work around like domestic timetables, and it's quite amazing.
I think just following on from just really quickly, what you were saying about how the tower might shape our activities, where we go back into it. One of the things that they did 20 years ago, when Doina was reflecting on this kind of feminist takeover they did 20 years ago, is they took the activities that they were doing. Well, first of all, it was a whole school event, but they took the activities out of the kind of traditional spaces. So they were doing talks in corridors, and they were, you know, and they were just moving around the tower in a way that kind of reframed some of the hierarchies and some of the, which I think on reflection was a really interesting thing to do, because it does exactly, it kind of questioned the way that spaces are programmed and to sort of frame a certain kind of activity. Did we catch all the comments on the Miro board, Emma, before we, maybe I think some of them actually might feed into the next
yeah, question. I thought maybe we'd move to the next question and keep picking up the comments as we go. Can I just recommend Jennifer Bloomer's work as well, or everyone, on both materiality and technology. And she was writing in the 90s on these very things and what they represented. And so I think that she's very much worth returning to. But I'm just going to read out the second question. And I think actually our questions start to layer into each other a bit more. Our second question was on access, memory, and curation. And I was going to sort of put this to Matriarch to begin with, but maybe, we can be more open than that, or we can start with Matriarch and move quickly to others. One important aspect of this archive is the curation of feminist work, obviously. How and who gets to decide the material that is included is a question we've had put to us. Are our policies and practices consistent with a feminist approach, and whose feminist approach? We are particularly mindful of needing to be intersectional as well, more intersectional. Is there anything we should do differently? So that's kind of a big question. Maybe Alice and Rosa might like to start.
Go on, Rosa.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it's quite I think it's this one that maybe we've kind of struggled to kind of tackle with a Matriarch about how, I don't know whose responsibility and whose role it is to decide what constitutes as feminist work and what doesn't. And I think part of it is just the partaking act of having a slightly feminist agenda, or maybe even just regarding yourself as a feminist, and therefore your practice maybe slightly engaging with kind of a feminist agenda. But I think there's a myriad of ways that people approach feminism, and so I think it's kind of a very hard notion of, can you make a judgment call on something, and what are you making that judgment call on? Is it based on the aesthetics of it and the quality of graphics, or is it to do with the content? And and so I'm not sure whose responsibility it is, and I mean,
and then there's people working with a feminist agenda that don't even know about it, or they're working with within the realm of social architecture, but don't feel like they can engage with the word feminist or feminism because of certain I guess barriers that word, I don't want to say that, but that word could create. And it's like, how do we create this inclusive space for people to feel like they can have these conversations, even if perhaps they are less maybe familiar or educated on the idea of feminism, even if perhaps they are, I don't know. So it's interesting, and it's a tough one, and I don't think there's also ever perfectly feminist work as well, and then truly feminist work is just striving for better. And actually it's never done, it's never complete, it's never it's never not open to critique, it's never finished.
It's provisional. Anna had a question, I think, in the chat.
I guess I think just adding on to that, same, that I don't know if barriers for me is quite the right word either, but I guess the word feminist in itself kind of seems to attract certain types of people, demographics of people to kind of engage in this conversation. Like, even just looking at this chat here, I think there's I just had a look, about at least 40 out of the 54 people here are women. Why do you think there's almost like a reluctance, or is there a reason for why it only seems to be women kind of engaging in these conversations? I think it's really important to, for everyone to be involved. How do you think you could, I don't know, how do you think we could deal with that to make it a conversation where literally, everyone's involved, including men?
I think that's a really important question. Yeah, I mean, and on this idea of what kind of naming the name as well. I mean, Carolyn's spoken quite eloquently about how in the sort of around maybe in the 2000s, they were working with a feminist agenda, but they weren't necessarily naming it as such, because even you know, so there's a history to not being able to name the work or claim the work or claim the word feminism as well. And I think we've entered into a period where we can claim that word and we can use it. We need to sort of develop that and seize the opportunity, and seize this moment to kind of include more voices, and make it a you know, not a marginal women-centered activity. I think Lewis and then Ayushi have questions.
Thank you, and I just wanted to chip in on that and suppose I contribute to what Anna was saying. I suppose it also depends on the traditions of feminism, and I know that there are different waves and different authors that talk differently about the what constitutes feminism. But there are also, I suppose, cultures in different countries, and I suppose from my experience coming from Mexico, in Mexico, feminism, it is a sort of women-centered activity, and it is frowned upon as a man to be seen to be involved in these activities, because a lot of people believe that you are basically trying to grab attention, that is something quite opportunistic from you. And I remember when I got to the UK, I think that it was one of the barriers for me to try and engage with that conversation. And of course, it took me a while to try to start reading people, to start reading different conversations, narratives on how feminism could also challenge the idea of masculinities, and how it can challenge the whole idea of identities and how we are socialized into different roles. But I suppose, just as I used to feel, I still feel a bit at times, I suppose a lot of our students, a lot of even our staff are feeling the same way, probably having to do with that different cultures, different understandings of feminism.
Ayushi?
I just wanted to kind of add to all of the stuff we're saying. I think often it's just a reluctance of talking about women's problems, and it links to what Louis just said. And I think before, when I think it was the second wave feminism, there's that whole idea of the personal being political, and where talking about women's problems come into academic writing, and often we struggle to find a place for that still. And I think men not being able to talk about women's problems stems from exactly toxic masculinity and insecurities. And I think it's a topic that everyone should feel they can talk about. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any comments on the Miro board, Alistair, that can be added in, or?
Any new comments, but I can just make one myself.
Yes, please.
From what everyone's just said, obviously educating yourself is something that's self-directed. You've got to have that purpose that's like inhibited. So as a platform, as a tool, do you think the library could sort of push the school to ingrain this within our studies? So from first year, even from design projects to humanities essays, could we push that narrative and suggest that perhaps there is a module that people respond in that way? But I don't know. That's my question. What level of activism can the platform achieve?
Can I come in on this one? I think that's a really good question. Whether it's a module or, you know, personally, I feel like it needs to actually cut through everything. But certainly we need more focus and resources on it. And But I think in terms of it being critical, I think for me, the spirit of the teach out was what I thought was so great about it was, well, firstly, the fact that it was collaborative. It wasn't just staff, it was students as well, massively driving it. Along with Matriarch, we had a lot of the crew that became the call to action group involved as well. We had a lot of student voices involved, kind of making it what it was. And there were a lot of celebratory, but also a lot of critical things. So I think we have struggled a lot with this question of, you know, how can you be within an institution, which you have to be if they're sort of funding the money, but also be kind of critical of that institution. And I think that's something that we feel, you know, something that is open and is a space for that kind of critical inquiry and critical conversation. I think we all feel passionate about it being that, but obviously, you know, there are, we sit within this institution. So I think therein lies quite a tension, really. I think it's just one of the areas where, in a way, I feel like we just have to own up and just say, you know, here are the imperfections we're aware of, you know, and maybe you can see some more. You know, I think the question of who makes the decisions is massively problematic. And I think one of the things we found out early on was, you know, a lot of people were instantly kind of saying, you know, who are you to say, well, not a lot, but we had some really valid voices saying, who are you to say what constitutes this and that and the other, and to decide what's included and what's excluded. And I think, you know, the reality is, if you've got a group of people in a room doing something together, you know, they know, you know, the references and the kind of context they have, that will be the starting point. So I think part of it is about who's in the room, you know, kind of being honest about the limitations of something in terms of how we operate, but then just trying to open up the room to invite people in, and for that to be as representative as it can be. Because as soon as you invite more people into the room, whether that's students, whether it's kind of you know, more staff, I think, you know, that's going to immediately open up the list of kind of, you know, contacts, ideas, points of reference, and make it more kind of properly representative, and also be this kind of critical friend to the school, which I think we all sort of like it to be. So I haven't really answered any questions there. I've just rambled as usual.
But I think Alistair's point is also very important, because it's sort of, how do we open up the library to be more inclusive, but how do we force the library to sort of perpetuate its agenda across the school as well, is the sort of opposite issue of that. We haven't really talked about that. How do we stop the library from just becoming this marginal activity? Okay, it's as inclusive as possible, but it also needs to kind of filter back and start to press upon the school itself, and maybe in quite a bottom-up way. I don't know, because you know, it's very reliant on who holds the power and authority in the school. You know, who decides who decides we're a feminist school. It's certainly not us. You know, it might be collectively us, but it's, you know, that's about as far as it goes. You know, how much power do we have to sort of decide that Sheffield School of Architecture is a feminist school of architecture? And how do we keep that conversation going, is, I think, quite a pressing one for me. I think Danny had something he wanted to add.
Yeah, I think you've got to think about it, whether it's a passive or an active resource. So if we think about a library, it's traditionally a passive resource for academics. So yes, you know, and we know how to use that, but I think this is being picked up. It's a really good point about it being a teaching resource, that actually you actively bring the library and you reference it in our teaching activities. Why not? That's what we can do as staff. It's what we can do as students as well. The other side of it, the other thing that we do in the school is EDI, which me and Kath have been involved in. So that is also a way that it's disseminated more actively within the school, especially if we're talking about it being more inclusive, is actually it can be a place, a repository for inclusive narratives, narratives of inclusion. and that becomes a very powerful voice. Again, something that we can reference. I was really excited by what Kith was saying, is that actually the more you open it up, the more inclusive it becomes, the more different voices, the more they're likely to rub against each other as well. So I think you've got to be really, really bold and unafraid that you're going to get voices that might contradict each other or might disagree with each other. But that's the debate of a healthy school of architecture. So if we ask the question, is the school a feminist school? Is there a healthy debate? That sort of answers that question. Is that going on?
Okay, Anna, and then Alice.
Yeah, I think just kind of adding to that, I think one of the questions that I had was, how do we, have, continue these kind of feminist principles on like a day-to-day basis within studio? And I think, yeah, I agree with that. As you guys as tutors and as students, really not being afraid to have those conversations, and often kind of quite difficult, uncomfortable conversations, is so important. And I think that's what studio is for, and we really need to, kind of encourage that. Yeah, as you said, that debate. Yeah, that's it. Just adding to that. Yeah, cheers.
Just gonna add to that again. It's also we have these conversations and they're brilliant, but the people that engage with them are the same people, and like how
exactly.
we do it. How do we get like all tutors to engage with these conversations, and that perhaps don't even identify as feminist, or maybe they are they do feminist practice, but they wouldn't. It's a barrier that we need to, if we are going to be a feminist school of architecture, if we're going to strive for that, then we need to overcome.
Yeah, and I think it's all well and good, like everyone here, with having these conversations about feminist practice, because we all agree with each other to an extent. So I guess, how do we, as you said, like broaden that conversation to the people who wouldn't necessarily actively involve themselves with these conversations?
I think that's really key. How should we're running out of time. We could just put the other two questions on the Miro board. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I wanted to add to that was that, and this is in the last question, that we've called, and I think I've said this already, but we called the library a living archive. And I think that's really, really important key part of it, is that it's living, that it's live, that it changes and collects. And I was wondering whether this thing of kind of how we disseminate ourselves further into the school, how we connect, how we force our agenda across the school, how we connect with those other voices that aren't part of our conversation, is through this live aspect of the library, whether it's through design projects, or whether it's through a series of talks, or whether it's through some kind of physical entity that then exists somewhere throughout the Arts Tower. I suppose it exists somewhere throughout the Arts Tower because it then will make itself visible and present to those working and studying there. But I think that's maybe what we should be thinking about in the near future, is how we can engage, not just be more inclusive, but include other voices, have conversations, reach out to those that don't normally see themselves as part of the conversation. What do you think, Kith? Shall we just quickly read these questions and then leave them on?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Do you want to read them out?
Okay, so number 3 was labour and resources, and this is something we haven't spoken about much today, but the library currently relies on scant financial resources from the faculty and department, which pay for an intern or student in very small blocks of time. and beyond that is mostly run on labour in kind from academics, alumni, and potentially students. How can this labour be understood as part of the library? What other resources or funding could be used? What are the ethics of such funding and labour approaches, given that we're a feminist library as well? So that's a kind of another difficult, unanswerable question, but people might have ideas. You know, should we be having bake sales or crowdfunding, or should we be, you know, forcing the department to give us more funding? And then question 4 is, whose library? And this, I think, overlaps with previous comments and discussion. The library was set up to collect and audit resources created by and for the school as a living archive. Some have questioned this internalization, i.e. some people have questioned that, say, why is it based in Sheffield? Why is it just a Sheffield School of school library? Why is it not collecting resources from the whole country or globally? But we welcome the use of the library from anyone, anywhere, but also wonder whether the library could or should be made broader. And that this really relates to funding and other issues as well. How would it be resourced then? Does it have could it have a wider impact as a kind of curricular resource to other schools? Could it have a reading lists? Could it have feminist curricula? Could it, you know, frame feminist modules or curricula for other schools to use? So those are sort of questions that we've kind of had and are on our minds, I guess, and we'd be really interested in hearing from you as a group. And I think you were going to close then, Kith.
Yeah, I guess we're out of time, aren't we?
Yeah.
It's so lovely to start to get some feedback and start to get a conversation going. So, I mean, I guess we can keep it going on the board maybe. I think the idea is for this to be the board to run throughout the whole week. So we can just put lots of different conversations on there, and I'm sure it'll start to self-curate as we go through the week. But yeah, I suppose from the crew that's currently at the helm, we just wanted to well, say thank you for having us, and a huge thank you to SSoA for everything you're doing this year and this week, and to the EDI Students Action Group and everybody working around in section feminism, the call to action crew, etc. I feel like there's a real energy at the moment, and hopefully we can kind of sustain that and make some meaningful change. Yeah, we just wanted to put a call out to say thanks to Matriarch for the first blog offer on the website now. We're open to other kind of blog posts. So if you've got anything you'd like to share, we'd love to put it on the library. I should just say as well, you know, when we get work offered, we haven't been overwhelmed by people offering work. It's been more kind of approaching people, just that we've, you know, come across or heard of, putting the word out. Generally, we're not sitting there going, now is this good enough to go in our amazing library? No, I'm not actually sure we've refused anything yet. You know, it's kind of, it's quite a sort of a welcoming, open, or I'd like to think it is. So, so yeah. But we would love to have your stories or your thoughts in terms of blog entries. So give us a shout if you want to contribute anything. Yeah.
Great, brilliant, thanks. I think Mimi raised her hand, maybe wants to add something.
Yeah, I just want to pipe in right at the end and say thank you all for contributing so much, but also to Anna, Tom and Ali, who've really pushed this from the very beginning. They've taken it into their own hands, and I think it's great to hear praise, but they really have been plugging it away in the background to make this such a full packed week. So well done, you three. You've been working so well together, and I think it's just highlights how well SSoA as a team have been working this year as well. So well done, team. Very proud.
Oh, thanks, guys. And I think also, you know, of course, we couldn't do it without, you know, everyone being so willing to have these conversations. So yeah, thanks so much for, I've really enjoyed this evening, and I think we're all really looking forward to the rest of the week. So yeah, keep adding your ideas and questions to the Miro board, and yeah, as I said, hopefully we'll get some interesting stuff by the end of the week.
Can I just put can I make one last comment?
Of course you can.
I think we need to, maybe one way of doing it is to reach out to your SSoA families. But I think one of the things I'm aware we need to do is to be getting people in the tent from the younger years, from the lower years, just in terms of thinking about legacy and where we're going next year. So whatever in you have with people from years 1 and 2, yeah, let's use that and spread the word a bit. And I think this week it's gonna make a big difference, and hopefully as the week goes on, we'll broaden out that attendance.
Great, thank you very much, everyone. I'd just like to thank SSoA properly as well, and for everyone for coming. And yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting week.